Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. The US envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, he came up with a proposal a couple of days ago in relation to the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, saying that the Palestinian resistance, they must release 5 live Israeli prisoners of war and 9 bodies. Now, some of those prisoners of war, they will have dual nationalities. Some of them will be American citizens too. Israel immediately accepted the offer. However, Hamas, they took their time. They haven't accepted it immediately. However, today, there was a response from Hamas. What they say, they said that we accept the offer. We accept the offer, but this is the trick here. We accept the proposal of the US envoy Steve Witkoff, and we're willing to release 1 Israeli-American prisoner of war alongside 4 or 5 bodies of Israeli prisoners of war inside of Gaza, without confirming how many of the remaining prisoners of war are alive and how many are dead. From how things are appearing, Hamas is working towards the United States, but they did not want to outright show rejection, because Israel immediately accepted the offer after they applied pressure on the United States, because both Benjamin Netanyahu and Dermer went on a crazy campaign, according to a US official, to prevent any deal happening directly between the United States and Hamas directly, and we'll get to that in a second. However, in relation to the Witkoff proposal, Hamas did not want to appear to be the side that is rejecting. However, they also don't want to fall into the trap. And why could it be a trap? Well, because the proposal from Witkoff, it says that they need to release them on the first day that this temporary ceasefire in between phase 1 and 2, the extension. And from an Israeli perspective, well, they can get them in return for a few Palestinians, well, a couple of hundred really, and then resume the war or resume the blockade. And Hamas, from their perspective, that would be a very high risk move. Anything that demands the release of Israeli prisoners of war in advance or in early stages rather than knocks, without the relevant outcome from Israel, without the relevant number of Palestinian prisoners of war, demands being implemented on the ground from the Israeli side being implemented on the ground, that's too much trouble for them. Because Hamas initially proposed to Israel, let's have a full-out deal where we release everyone, you release everyone, you declare the ending of the war, and we allow all aid to go in, and we start talking about rebuilding Gaza. Of course, Israel did not want that, primarily for Benjamin Netanyahu's interests. He did not want an outright solution. To him, it would look like a humiliation. However, what he didn't consider is the fact that due to the Israeli prisoners of war being released in knocks, he made more risks. He made things more risky. And during phase 1 of the ceasefire, Israel had many breaches in the ceasefire agreement, and that led the Palestinian resistance to take more harsh positions and stances when they wanted to release the Israeli prisoners of war. They stopped releasing them in advance and then wait for Israel to release them on the day, because Israel delayed it multiple times, and they don't want to fall into the same trap again. Now, before we get into the details of the Hamas response, Witkoff already responded, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying this is ridiculous. They haven't budged a millimeter. They haven't moved an inch. They haven't done anything with this response. And Steve Witkoff said it's impractical. It's impractical, and he's trying to apply more pressure on Hamas to go ahead with his proposal, otherwise face consequences. These consequences that the Palestinians are always threatened with, but the Israeli side, of course, is not threatened with. No, the Israeli side gets the 1-ton bombs that land on children. Hamas, from their side, they said, fine, we're showing seriousness. They were already talking with the United States administration, and they said, yeah, fine, and we will release an American Israeli in phase 1 in the first day, alongside 4 bodies. Then immediately we go into talks of ending the war, allowing all of the aid in, getting the tens of thousands of approximately 60,000 mobile homes, the tents that the people need temporarily before Gaza is being rebuilt, alongside all of the medical aid, the heavy equipment, to remove all of the rubble, of course, and start talking about the rebuilding process and the day after in Gaza. Hamas wants something comprehensive that will not leave any space for more Israeli breaches, because the theme in all of this is Israeli aggression, Israeli breaches, Israeli war crimes. All of that is linked to Israel. And Hamas, they know them very well. They've been dealing with them for a very long time, for several decades now, and they don't want to put themselves in a risky position. What does this mean for the negotiations, and what does this mean moving forward? Well, firstly, to understand what it means, we need to compare it to previous attempts. Previously, well, the Biden administration, primarily Antony Blinken at the time, they had multiple attempts against the Palestinian resistance, saying take it or leave it in many cases. This is the best deal that can come on the table. If you don't accept this deal, you're going to be destroyed. We've heard all of that before for the past year and a half from the Biden administration, and we heard it from Trump too. And Trump came up with even more radical statements against Hamas, promising them hell to pay, and threatening that everything will end and everyone will die in Gaza. And Hamas know that. It's part of the psychological warfare and the pressure that they have during the negotiations. Now, Israel is now blaming Hamas with this psychological warfare, with their response. Why? Because Israel understands that, well, Hamas is showing flexibility to the United States because they're willing to release an American Israeli on the first day, and 4 bodies of dual nationals, meaning none of them are only Israeli. So from an American perspective, the United States will say, well, hold on a second, Hamas is showing leniency. There's give and take with them, and Israel is the problem. Israel is very upset with this Hamas move, which is very well calculated. Hamas wanted to show that, yeah, we are flexible, but with dual nationals, as a show of respect to their ongoing negotiations with the United States, despite Israel trying to hinder all of these talks. When it comes to the hindering of these talks, we've been talking about it from several weeks, how Israel firstly exposed the talks before they were due to be published anyway, between Hamas and Adam Bowler in particular. Israel is very concerned about that. They made multiple moves to try and hinder it. And now there was also a report that actually Benjamin Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, both of them worked very hard to stop the US-Hamas deal. Why did they do that? Well, they were afraid. They were afraid that this will create a precedent of a relationship between Hamas and the United States where there's give and take. Because Israel previously proposed to Hamas, let's talk directly. Hamas refused. And now they're talking with the United States. And from an Israeli perspective, this is creating some tensions. Now, according to this U.S. official, and this report came on multiple mainstream media, one of them was Times of Israel, he said actually that they went on a crazy campaign, both Benjamin Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, because from Netanyahu and Dermer's perspective, they did not want anyone to be released without coordination from Israel. And of course, Netanyahu was fuming. Angry reaction came up from him. His office dismissing the report as outright fake news and playing into the Hamas propaganda. Playing into the Hamas propaganda, although it's coming from a US official published on their mainstream media. Well, everything becomes Hamas propaganda. So they're worried. In the meantime, they still have leverage, of course, with the United States administration. who are trying to apply pressure on Hamas to accept this medium kind of agreement before they go into phase 2. And the response that they're getting from Hamas is very basic. We continue to adhere to the agreement we had signed with all of you on the 17th of January, which included moving from phase 1 to phase 2. And phase 2 includes ending the war and allowing everything in. And despite the fact that we went into phase 1, Israel had many breaches that they still haven't really corrected to this day. It's very simple. There is an agreement. One side is not adhering to this agreement. Hamas have been implementing this agreement to a T, whereas Israel has been breaching every single day by not allowing the relevant aid, especially when we talk about the temporary housing and the tents, the medical equipment required, and the heavy equipment to remove the rubble. Food, they had food inside of Gaza, but now, of course, they're cutting that too. And the cutting of the electricity off Gaza. War crimes, blatant war crimes in broad daylight. Does this mean that it's not going to succeed moving forward? No, because we still had progress previously. Again, we need to judge it based on the previous progress. There were attempts previously to hinder, leverage, threats with hell multiple times, and things still moved forward. So there's a very high likelihood that things will move forward again, and it's the United States and Israel still trying to apply pressure on Hamas to get more for the Israeli side and leave the Palestinians in a very vulnerable and insecure position. And again, Israel is breaching every day. Today they killed 2 children inside of Gaza, and hardly anyone talks about that. Neither the United States administration, it's as if there are no breaches. When Israel commits breaches and genocide and crimes, as if nothing is happening. But when a fly coughs in Israel, the whole world goes upside down. Moving on to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. In Israel, there's a very big debate, of course. There's a big movement to go and accept a whole deal. The families of the prisoners of war, they're applying pressure, they're protesting. People in the political establishment are saying that we need to go ahead, we need to release everyone, we don't have time to waste. We're putting the lives of the Israeli prisoners of war at risk. Again, not out of love for the Palestinians, of course, but putting the lives of the Israelis at risk. As a matter of fact, yesterday we spoke about the court case that's being brought forward by the families of the prisoners of war to the Supreme Court, saying that no, you need to reverse this decision to cut electricity off Gaza because it's going to affect the Israeli prisoners of war. Makes sense. Made sense for people in Israel from the beginning to say you can't go on an outright campaign in Gaza with carpet bombing because you risk the lives of Israelis, which is what happened. Well, Israeli lives were lost. 30% of the prisoners of war in Gaza. Then we had more clarification that the Hannibal Directive was implemented inside of Gaza. And on the 7th of October, of course, with the massacres in the Nova Festival, in the Israeli kibbutzes of Be'eri and Nir Oz, and the orders that the pilots were getting to attack everything going back to Gaza, moving back to Gaza, and sometimes without them knowing, by the way, according to some reports. According to other reports, some of them knew exactly what they were doing. The Hannibal Directive was implemented, and Israel killed 1/3 of their prisoners of war in Gaza. But now the talk is to do more with the day after. Because on the other hand, people are saying, well, how can we go ahead with this whole deal? And this deal is actually keeping Hamas in Gaza, allowing Hamas to remain in Gaza in the day after. And today there was an interesting article written by Gideon Levy in Haaretz, who said that accepting Hamas's survival is the only path moving forward. He said after the deaths of hundreds of Israeli soldiers and tens of thousands of Gazans, Hamas remains. After destruction on the scale of Dresden, Hamas remains. In fact, only Hamas remains in Gaza. We must acknowledge this and draw the conclusions according to Gideon Levy. What was not achieved in 17 months of the most barbaric force in Israel's history will not be achieved with even more barbaric force of Israel. He also said Hamas are here to stay. It has been critically injured militarily, according to him, and it will recover. Politically and ideologically, it grew stronger during the war. He also added that Israel no longer has the power to take Hamas off. What are you talking about even? He said it cannot replace another nation's regime as the United States once could. Quote, the king of Gaza will be from Hamas or anointed with its consent. He also said that having the Palestinian Authority is like a pipe dream, and anyone who wanted a different government should have thought of this at the time of Israel's 2005 disengagement from the Strip, when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Of course, there was an Israeli plan there, but it also came after repeated blows from the Palestinian resistance. Levy also addressed the talks again about the day after, and he said that there is no day after Hamas, and presumably there won't be one anytime soon. Hamas is the only governing body in Gaza, at least in the current nearly inalterable circumstances, and Hamas are there to stay. We need to talk to the organization, even, or in fact specifically, after October the 7th. Now, Gideon Levy, many people criticize him, of course, in Israel, but he still represents an idea that circulates inside of Israel. As a matter of fact, this idea circulates amongst some of the top figures in the Israeli political and security echelons. It's not something that's only coming from him. And it's slowly sinking in to the Israeli society. However, Benjamin Netanyahu is working really, really hard to make it appear to be impossible, or show that somehow it's not going to work. Show that Hamas will not be able to stay there. We can't accept them remaining in Gaza. Again, only for his own interests. Benjamin Netanyahu, one of the key reasons that he's delaying all of this, by the way, is so that he can have everything based on his timeline. He does not want to step down as the prime minister. He knows that if the war all of a sudden finishes and everything finishes, all eyes are on him. Thousands of corruption charges. He's in the Israeli courts now, after the Supreme Court forced him to be in the Israeli courts during the war, because one of the reasons that he also delayed this war and dragged this war for so long is to attempt to hide away from the court, saying that we have an emergency and we have a war, and he still tries to come up with these excuses now. However, he knows if anything happens in a hurry, if all of a sudden we're into phase 2 and phase 3 and the war ends and that's it, all eyes are on him. People will be asking for early elections. People will be asking him to pay the price. People will be asking him to be held accountable. As a matter of fact, they already are anyway. And many people have been unhappy with him before the 7th of October. So many of his attempts now are to simply drag this whole situation. Drag it up until he knows there is sufficient time for him after the war to continue. And we're talking about 2026, by the way. We're still in the beginning. We're still in March 2025. The next Israeli election will take place in 2026. And there's a very high likelihood that Benjamin Netanyahu will still be dragging all of this. 42 days. Now we wasted over 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Maybe another month will be wasted before, talks about phase 2 will be implemented. And then we're going to talk about phase 3, and then that will drag again. 3 months, up until we reach 2026, all of a sudden he wants to hail himself as the person who's victorious, or potentially do anything dodgy with the Israeli elections, for example, all for his own sake. With the pressure, however, coming internally from Israel, it's looking like there will be some moves moving forward. Whether Benjamin Netanyahu tries to delay this by a week or two or a month, clearly the administration in the United States, despite their statements that are coming primarily in support of Israel and criticizing the Palestinian side, at the end of the day, they did push Netanyahu to go into the ceasefire. We are seeing a push towards a ceasefire and a peaceful solution between Russia and Ukraine too. They're going to withdraw from Syria. All of these indicate that the United States administration, they are not looking to continue with the war. They want to end it. So one way or another, Benjamin Netanyahu will have to give in. The question is, how much will he be given? How much time will he be given? And for the moment, he is dragging as much time as possible.